In the landmark trial on Arizona inmate health care. As we've been reporting, this trial comes after a federal judge threw out a 2015 settlement ruling the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation and Reentry failed to meet its promises on providing adequate health care for inmates.
Investigative reporter Shaley has followed this case for years and is listening in on testimony this week. She joins us now with an update.
For years, inmates have argued the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation and Reentry has failed to meet their basic health care needs. They say conditions are so bad, the state is violating their constitutional rights by subjecting them to cruel and unusual punishment. Now, we're not allowed to record the federal court proceedings, but I do have copies of documents presented to the court which show what's happening behind bars. Take a look at these photos provided by the plaintiff's expert witness, Dr. Pablo Stewart, a psychiatrist and correctional psychiatry expert. Stewart says this inmate has been diagnosed with several serious mental illnesses. Stewart says here the inmate suffered from a psychotic episode, banging his head against a wall, believing he needed to kill himself in order to save his daughter. Stewart says instead of calling in a mental health expert, the inmate was shot at least 4 times with a semi-automatic pepper ball launcher and told by a corrections officer, quote, "Each time you do this, you're going to get shot with a pepper ball now. And if that don't work, I'm going to tase you." The state argued Stewart only visited with a small number of inmates, many of whom were severely mentally ill, therefore failing to really gather an accurate picture of what's happening behind bars. Stewart also brought up staffing issues. This chart, for example, shows the Tucson facility does not have a psychiatrist on staff and hasn't had one since May. The facility is also understaffed when it comes to psychologists and psych associates. However, the state has argued some vacancies are being filled by part-time workers or overtime work. Stewart also raised concerns with solitary confinement cells like this one, which he says he found covered in blood. The inmates living in adjacent cells told Stewart an inmate had cut himself the night before, and despite inmates banging on their cell doors and yelling "man down," it took at least 5 minutes for officers to respond, and that no effort had been made to clean up the blood. The state argued that Stewart had no way to confirm that this was blood. Another plaintiff's expert witness, Dr. Craig Haney, a professor of psychology and the University of California's Santa Cruz presidential chair, took the stand today. He told the court Arizona has no limitations when it comes to solitary confinement, meaning inmates can spend years, even decades, in isolation. Haney says studies have shown those who spend an extended amount of time in isolation are more likely to commit suicide. According to this ADCRR data gathered by Stewart, 33 out of 54 suicides since January 2014 happened in some type of isolation. Stewart and Haney also expressed concerns surrounding inmate healthcare privacy. They say some clinicians see inmates at their cells, where conversations can be overheard by other inmates and staff. Stewart says he knows of times when clinicians have called on other inmates to serve as interpreters during a mental health check, which is a violation of inmate privacy. The state argued some patients refuse to be seen privately, forcing those visits to take place at the cells. Haney says he spoke with inmates who have refused private visits because they require them to sit restrained in cages like this one, that they find, quote, dehumanizing and hardly conducive to building trust and rapport. The state argued there are some inmates who have a history of violence, and if they're going to be seen privately by a healthcare provider without the protection of officers, this type of restraint is necessary. This trial is expected to last several more days. The state has cross-examined these expert witnesses and called into question their qualifications. We will continue to follow this trial and bring you the very latest. Shaley Sanders, Fox 11 investigates.